building with timber. So I see the screen is up. I hope that works. I cannot see it, but I would assume it does. So let me just dive into it, and I will keep it short. I know it's late in the afternoon for everybody. So when we look in the world, there's actually very different approaches on building with timber, especially we architects like to look at big and complex buildings, but the majority of the buildings we're building are actually single family houses. And if you look in the world, like in the regions, Europe, where the timber innovation is coming from, actually we see that they build very little with timber, 15% in Germany, 35% in Austria, 50% in Scandinavia. Of course, when the context of the country, mountains, cold gets more complex, then we tend to use timber because it's a simple material which we can implement everywhere without many foundations. In the United States, however, we see that there is 80% of our single family houses being constructed in timber. And of course, this has to do a bit with the American dream. America doesn't have like the cultural background of Europe with the big fires burning down whole cities which were built in timber. So America adopted timber construction because they could build a lot bigger houses with timber than they could in conventional structure. And therefore, like the majority of all the single family houses here in the US is built in timber. Now, how would we relate that back to Africa? There's no real reliable numbers of how much we built with timber in Africa. But for me, a good reference would be like the knowledge which we have is that 51% of the sub-Saharan population lives in informal settings. And informal settings are, per definition, single family houses built with traditional building means. That means a lot of these houses will have, to some extent, timber into them. And often people say, you know, building with timber, cutting down the trees is not good for the environment. Also there, I have this little graph here in the left bottom. We have to think about that a tree like contributes most of the oxygen to our climate in the growing phase. It's like our children. They need a lot more food when they're growing. And when we get older, we should not eat too much because we become just fat. This is the same with trees. When they are like 30 years, 40 years of age, it's actually good to cut them down and to replace them with younger trees because they will create a lot more oxygen for our environment. So also there, if the forestry is done in the right way, timber is really contributing something to our climate. And another thing what I hear often is like there is hardly any wood in Africa. Also that is not true. This is a map of the world. And actually there's more timber, more forest in Africa than there is in Asia when we look at the percentage of land coverage. Of course, a part of that coverage is down to a primary forest, which we should not touch. But a large portion of the forest we have in Africa is also plantations and forests specifically to use in industrial ways. Now, we work a lot in East Africa, especially in Tanzania. There we have like the great setting that we have like over 50% of the country still covered with forest. Nigeria has like slightly less than 10% currently covered with forest. But for example, we also work a lot in Kenya. There we have like 8% forest coverage, and it always depends on how this forest is set up in relation to how we can use it. So we know timber building is good. We know we have the timber. Here, for example, like an image from Tanzania, large plantations, you can drive for hours. It's all mature wood, and currently all that wood is basically driven into the paper mill and not used for construction. So how can we change that? How can we add the value to a product which we have like locally available in Africa at large extents? We currently use a lot for it for paper, for charcoal, for firewood that doesn't add any value to the resource we're cutting down. Construction adds a lot more value to this resource. And that combined with the population growth we have in Africa, where like the calculations are around that we will double Africa in size in the next 30 years. That means we have to build also houses for all these people, which will come to the continent in addition to the people already living there. If you do the calculation, 1.2 billion people, 5-6 people in a household, 300 to 400 million houses we need to build. So we have a material which regrows, which is sustainable, and we have a demand to build houses. Why don't we build these houses in a more sustainable way in timber? That basically like started our thinking process 8 years ago. And we are, of course, architects, so we are at the end of this value chain. But if you want to start implementing this, you have to look at the whole value chain. So we looked into the forestry, we looked into what do we have locally available, and we looked into who can actually build and work with that. And based on that, we started a journey of building a city in timber, or at least a big part of it. And that city is called Fumba Town, where I will focus on in this lecture. And that city is located in Zanzibar, off the coast of Tanzania. And it's an overflow city for the fast-growing Zanzibar city. This is the master plan. We built a portion of that already. So this has been built in 8 years' time. Around 50% is built in timber, and I will come to those projects in a moment. The town is not only a town built for timber, it's a sustainable town. So we have a lot of thought also in like the landscaping, permacultural principles where the waste is all recycled. There are nurseries, there is like waste recycling put back into the soil is sold to the new homeowners, and then they can grow their plants, which they get from the nursery into that. So it's a holistic approach on that. And of course, that approach is done in such a way that we really create community. So we don't want to just create houses and the same houses over and over again. We want to create like a lively and vibrant community, which also determines what we're actually building there. And that, of course, consists also out of bars, restaurants, playgrounds, and the great assets we have in this town is that we are just next to the Indian Ocean. So this is the same town 8 years ago. We started basically off with 2 houses. One was built in timber and the other was built in stone, but for the rest, they were identical. We had no idea if local population and people investing their money would be interested in building in timber to start off with. So we started off and we gave them the choice. And we've seen that from that, like around slightly more than half chose the timber house. So these timber houses were basically built in a very simple way. They were prefabricated stick-built timber frame houses. So we have a factory specifically built next to the town. There were no woodworkers in the region, so fishermen from the local villages were educated to work with timber in a factory setting. And then they created these panels, and the panels were put together on site to create these timber houses. Very simple system, very effective to start off with, also to educate the people to actually work with the timber, but of course taking up a lot of precious land. So from there, we started to develop other projects. We went from that 1-story approach to a 2-story approach. We just heard a lecture about traffic, and of course also in this town we're looking into how can we reduce the traffic, how can we cut away roads, because like the biggest impact on traffic and traffic organization is like the upkeep for those roads. So we created this project here where we cut out half of the roads in relation to the other projects and made that into community gardens. And into those gardens we built the project, which consists out of a very simple housing typology with 4 housing apartments under one roof. And these apartments are set up in a very flexible way. So they can be a general layout 2-bedroom apartments, but they could also integrate a 3-bedroom or a loft setting. You see very optimized in terms of their planning. All the pipework is combined so that we keep the costs down. Now, the thing was, of course, is how do we build a building like this 2-story with a simple timber frame? And this is where we then started to introduce the first mass timber products. And I'm not sure if it is, but I'm 99% sure that this is the first mass timber project done in East Africa and certainly on the island. So we started to use cross-laminated timber for the ceilings. To basically deal with the multi-story approach, both in terms of like structure, of course, but also acoustics and fire. So still the walls all prefabricated as timber frame. You see how clean the construction site is. There's minimal waste. All that waste is in the factory. It's reused. So in relation to conventional structure, also more effective. And then this is basically on top of that ground floor, waiting for the concrete to be poured on top to create the acoustics. And this is the project a couple of months ago. So you see, like, the first houses are finished here on the left. On the right, you see the foundations being prepared. And actually, it's interesting because here you see this is just has been assembled to the ground floor. Here the roof is already on there. Here the facade is on there, and here the windows are on there, and they're doing the fit out. So you see really the different stages of this project. So very simple housing. What we of course did in terms of the architectural approach is that we integrated a lot of passive design measures to deal with the harsh climate. We're in a tropical context here, very humid as well. So we have cross ventilation, which you nicely can see on this image, integrated in all apartments. We have an overstand on the roof to reduce the heat gain, and we use this closed panels to open up and to allow ventilation, but also to regulate the amount of light we let go inside. When somebody is not at home, you close the panel, there's less glass, so there's less light coming inside, and the apartment heats up less. When you're at home, you open the panel, you have cross ventilation, and you have more light inside, not needing to turn on the artificial light. So we think really holistically throughout this process. Of course, we use the CLT here to a good extent to keep it exposed to really also benefit these apartments. But those were of course then the first step, and still didn't bring us to the kind of density we were looking for. So we developed a third project, and this project was done as a kind of townhouse approach, completely in mass timber. And that works really great. This is an image from January where the CLT structure was just assembled. So it all comes prefabricated, is assembled on site, and within a month your whole house stands, and then it basically awaits like the finishing on the outside, and then after that the inside. Again, from an architectural point of view, for example, here marked, all the bathrooms are modular elements. So the house looks very diverse and lively, but it all consists out of the same elements. We just flipped around the balconies from one side to the other to enhance the privacy, but the element on the inside is still the same. It's just mirrored and turned the other way around. The same for the corner units. You see these rooms are the same, these rooms are the same, and these rooms are the same. So modular elements to create diversity in the eventual project, also to keep the cost effective, of course, for these projects. Here you see some images from the inside. Of course, the timber has a great effect on the inside. Not everybody likes it to the full extent, of course, but the big benefit for us in this climate is that the wood doesn't store heat, other than, for example, concrete and masonry does. So we have big problems with all the conventional built projects, especially on the top floor in the town, because the buildings heat up and they radiate these heats throughout the day. So you always have to run your AC when you live in a building like that. We don't have that issue in a timber building. It doesn't heat up like that. So your AC becomes a lot more effective. So it brings down your electricity costs a lot. And the other big benefit we have with timber construction is that we don't have the curing time. In a humid and hot climate, concrete takes a lot of time to cure. And timber is just ready to move in right away. And especially when you build new construction in a climate like that, that's a huge benefit. Now, after we built this first building, we asked ourselves, do we need to do all of this in timber? Maybe a relating story to that. I think we as architects need to be very careful about how we work with resources. I mean, we all these days have a mobile phone, and I'm 40 years old. I got my first mobile phone, I think I was 22 years old. I know that in the first 22 years of my life, we have had 3 phones shared with the 5 people, like my 2 sisters and my parents. And in that second stage of my life, I don't know how many phones I had, numerous, and everybody has phones. So we're using all of a sudden a lot more resources, for example, with our phones than we used before. And I think this is something where we need to work on, also when we work with timber. So what we did is, after we built the first building, we went back with the client together and said, how can we optimize this building? Do we need CLT, MS timber everywhere? And how can we optimize that? So we came to a conclusion where we only have the cores and the ceiling still in mass timber, and all the rest is done in timber frame. So that not only reduced resources, it also cut the cost by more than a third down. So we strongly believe that, like, we have to balance between the resources we use also when we build with wood. Wood, like MS timber specifically, is not the solution. It's a solution in the context of like how we combine all materials. Now, with these first 3 projects, we made good strides, and people started to understand why we should build with wood, but we didn't get a lot of attention. So together with our client, we said we need something which sets us apart, which brings us onto the global stage to show what we're doing here and to show how this is actually contributing to the local environment. And we developed this huge project, the Burj Zanzibar. Some of you may have heard about it. So this is a hybrid timber building. And the intention, of course, was here in a similar way as for example, Apple introduced the iPhone or Tesla introduced the electric car, is to go up market and say, you know, we have this great product and this is made out of timber, it's innovative. And we've seen a lot of like, interest in this, and a lot of people were buying, and especially the more expensive apartments, and that was exactly what we wanted, because if we can show that people with money are investing in projects like this, also local people start to see that wood is cool, that wood is something where what they can trust and where they can invest their money in. That was what we anticipated that would happen with this project, and we're happy that it worked out. I will not go too deep into this project specifically, but of course this also takes a lot from like the experience we had from the other projects, where we have like a core and then a facade as a very simple modular system to create a very vibrant tower and facade to it. Now, what I think is for us the most important project at the moment is what we call Che Living. And this is the first project where we are really addressing also the local market to a big extent, where we have like equitable and affordable housing. So units starting at $10,000 in this project. And it has been a big success story. We sold like 7 complete buildings within a couple of months. We added like to the original 9 buildings, another 24. We're currently talking about a second town where we are implementing this specific approach into a local context. And of course, this context is not only about like how do you build, it's about the community, about the private spaces you create, and also how this relates back to the local architecture. And these are some examples out of Stone Town, which is the historical part of Zanzibar city, just next to our new town. And you see that this works in a similar way. They use like portico structures in timber in the local town as additional sun shading, as a place to meet. And exactly that is what we did as well for this local focus projects in a similar way. And the other thing what we did is we looked deeply into like a lot of like the African examples which failed. There's a lot of like new towns being built, and they are built for one specific type. There's a good example in Tanzania on the mainland. A whole new city was envisioned, but it were all 2-bedroom apartments. So you had a very homogeneous community, and of course nobody wanted to live there because of that reason. So when we develop a building, like we look into how can I diversify that. So in this building volume, we can create everything from a 20 square meter studio up to like an 80 square meter 3-bedroom apartment. And we can implement that in a flexible way. And of course, that starts to make the community. And not only do we integrate housing into these projects, we also allow shops in there, from small shops, 10 square meters it starts with, to bigger shops. So, and from there, so this is the backside, basically showing the commercial portion of the building. Sorry, Ibukun. Yes, I'm almost through. I'm almost through. Sorry about that. So I have 3 more slides. So also here, what we did is we looked into like not only like the material we use, but also about like the local value chain. What can we replace by local material? So by the first projects, we looked into the performance criteria. Now we look into what can we source locally. And that is very important because we do want to look at that whole value chain. We want to enable that like what we have locally in wood can also be used there. And to do that, we have to look beyond our profession. We work with the universities through Tanzania and East Africa, South Africa, and the US, Europe, together to connect knowledge, to specifically determine what is needed in terms of the production process to enable us to create timber housing. We see one of the big problems or challenges we are facing is that actually we don't have the contractors and the knowledge to implement this. So what happens is that a lot of this knowledge needs to be imported, and of course that we want to stop in the future. We want to do this with local people in a local context with local materials, because that's where we can really make a contribution to like the demographic challenges by the housing we need to create, and also to a better climate to the future. And I think Africa is in a wonderful position there to really tackle something which the rest of the world cannot, because we do have the resource, we do have the demand. Now we just need to like bring that together and start building more with timber. And we can we showed that it can be done. We showed that people are buying the properties. We're the fastest selling real estate project in East Africa for many years in a row already, and we do that in timber. And this certainly is something which is not only happening in East Africa. It will happen and start to happen throughout the continent. And the sooner we can be on board with that, and also the sooner we as architects can learn about that and contribute that, the better we are placed for a more sustainable future. And apart from that, visit a timber house, you will see how much nicer a timber house is than a conventional built house. Thank you. That was everything. This will be Fumba in the future. These were these 2 houses where it started with, and this town, hopefully in a couple of years from now, will have that fully built. Thank you so much from my side.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Leander Moon. We have come to almost the end of the Lagos Architects Forum for today. If Architect Sani Salawa will have 1 or 2 words to just round off comments from the last speaker and this presentation, and then we'll take our final awards for today.
Thank you very much, our able secretary, Architect Moniba. We've had a very good presentation on transportation in relation to Lagos as an evolving organism. It is quite interesting to note that transportation occupies a very, very integral aspect of our city's development and evolvement. I found it very easy to relate this lecture with the previous lectures we've had on real estate development, because speaking from that perspective, you could easily understand that some specific areas are being avoided. People are migrating because of how difficult it is to access those parts of the city. So we would want to have some questions at this point on that presentation from the audience, or if anybody has any comment to make in addition, this is the time to do it. And remember, we have run out of time. So we would want to have that done as quickly as possible. So any questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much. I believe that's it, or are we supposed to also take from the... Okay, so very much. Back to Moniba.
Thank you very much, sir. We'll be taking, yesterday we're supposed to have 2 celebrity architects, so we'll take the next award for the celebrity architects for the Lagos Architects Forum 2023, Lab 14.0.